Okay, so it's quite a thing to be giving the last talk in this particular series, very powerful series going into these two parables. And here we are, the third and last of our talks, our evenings on the jewel in the garment. And I'm going to start by reading the story again. This is a different translation you'll get this evening, a different rendering of the story. It is like the case of a man who went to the house of a close friend and, having become drunk on wine, lay down to sleep. At that time, the friend had to go out on official business. He took a priceless jewel, sewed it in the lining of the man's robe, and left it with him when he went out. The man was asleep, drunk, and knew nothing about it. When he got up, he set out on a journey to other countries. In order to provide himself with food and clothing, he had to search with all his energy and diligence, encountering very great hardship and making do with what little he could come by. Later, the close friend happened to meet him by chance. The friend said, "How absurd, old fellow! Why should you have to do all this for the sake of food and clothing? In the past, I wanted to make certain you will be able to live in ease and satisfy the 5 desires. And on such and such a day and month and year, I took a priceless jewel and sewed it into the lining of your robe. It must still be there now. But you did not know anything about it, and fretted and wore yourself out trying to provide a living for yourself. What nonsense! Now you must take the jewel and exchange it for goods. Then you can have whatever you wish at all times and never experience poverty or want." So there's the story. And the question I'm starting with this evening is, well, the obvious one: what is the jewel? And different ways of approaching that question, but our title this evening rather gives it away. The jewel, we could say, is our true nature. It is who we truly are. But this is something we forget even after seeing the jewel. Even in some ways it would be more appropriate if the story, the man had seen that they had a jewel in his robe but completely forgotten about it. I mean, that's a slightly different meaning it would carry in that case. But yeah, the man has sort of forgotten or getting little glimpses of the jewel, but kept forgetting it was there, and not really believing he was carrying a jewel. Couldn't quite take that in somehow, let alone remove it from the lining and take it out. So you could say the jewel is our, well, sometimes the term that's used is Buddha nature. Now, this is a term we've got to be quite careful with, because it can imply that we're kind of already enlightened and we just got to wake up to that fact and then everything will be fantastic. And because we're already enlightened, well, we don't really have to do anything, don't have to bother with all this practice stuff. But of course, it's not like that, is it? It's not like that. We do have to bother with all this practice stuff, because what's there is, if you like, a potentiality, our potentiality for awakening, for liberation of our mind. But, and this is what I want to focus on tonight, This potentiality we have for liberation is something we have a relationship with. Yeah, it's not a total stranger to us. And that relationship we have with it, is what we call shraddha. So shraddha, imagine you probably all come across this. Often we translate it as faith, not of course in the sense of sort of a blind belief, a creed, but faith as, if you like, a heart response. Sometimes it's translated as confidence, trust, which I don't quite does justice to it, but it's got a good flavour. So shraddha is our response to what's truly beautiful, not just lovely, but truly beautiful. It's our response to what's truly good. It's our response to the truth of the way things are. And that includes the truth, yes, of our own potential to fully realize that truth. So shraddha picks up on this possibility of freedom, the taste of freedom that Samudraghosha talked about last week or the week before. That taste of freedom is, if you like, it's shraddha that tastes that pulls us towards that possibility of liberation. Our teacher, Sangha, he defined shraddha as, or described it as, the response of what's ultimate in us to what's ultimate in the universe. So something that's sort of deep in our nature, the core of our being, if you like, that responds to, in a way, is not separate from ultimately the ultimate nature, words fail me here, of reality, life, experience. So let me give you some examples. So a very simple thing is maybe you're just reading a Dharma book or listening to a talk, and something just sort of hits home, and there's sort of recognition, oh gosh, yes, that's pointing to something significant, that's important. Yeah, so that's one very simple example. I'll give a couple more examples in a bit more detail, more personal ones. So I was rereading earlier an article that was published a couple of months ago, so a Guardian article on COVID-19 and how it's changed science. And incredibly, it's sort of a story about the incredibly hard work that scientists all over the world have put in, and the collaboration between them, out of which, which has limited at least the future damage of this pandemic, out of which have come these vaccines, for example. And clearly incredibly hard work that's gone into that, and some personal stories in this article. One woman who was staying with her mother and brother in the lockdown, and she was a scientist actually here in Cambridge, and working incredibly hard. And her family said, well, they would stay up until as late as she needed to finish work before they had dinner together, even if it was sort of 11:30 in the evening. And I was just really moved by this, just the incredible dedication and care for these professionals and those who are supporting them, let alone the NHS. And that is a response that has the flavour of shraddha. And part of that is, I could give myself more fully than I do, not through being a scientist, but in other ways. It's that sense of that's possible for me and more, because I'm practicing the Dharma. So see what I mean? There's a kind of response to goodness, if you like, there. And then I wanted to bring in, talk about images. So I could talk about my response to sort of an image of a Buddha figure, for example, but I thought I'd talk about an image I've got on the wall of my room. And on the wall of my room, I've got an Annunciation image by Fra Angelico. So it's a Christian image. Most Christian imagery either I don't connect with, or even a bit like that, but an Annunciation is something else. And this is, this angel figure, this being, if you like, from a higher dimension, gold all over, halo wings, brimming with sort of beauty and vitality, and communicating. And the Virgin Mary is sort of receiving this communication, if you like, from this higher dimension. And if I sit and look at that, which I don't often do, but I did earlier today, it does get me. It's just something of a different order coming in and wanting to be received. So that is a symbol of and an experience of shraddha. A very different example. So last night, I was a bit short of sleep. I was awake for quite a while in the middle of the night. And I'd had this previous experience the previous night. And then the previous morning, I'd gone to sit with our community in the morning, and I'd gone back to bed quite early. And this morning I thought, oh, maybe I'll do that again. Maybe I'll just have a short meditation and I'll go back to bed. And I noticed, oh, hang on a minute. No. This is just an idea you've got. That'll be a nice thing to do. But actually, you don't really need more sleep in the same way this morning. I just noticed it was a kind of laziness coming in. And that actually, that wasn't really what I needed. What I needed was to really meditate. So that too was a response of shraddha. It was catching a reaction that wasn't actually going to be very helpful, going back to bed in this case. So, okay. Lost my place in my notes. Yeah, okay. So what when we're without shraddha? Well, the story tells us that in a way, doesn't it? So in the story, the man doesn't know the jewel is there. He's completely lost touch with it. Well, he never knew it was there in the story. And so things are tough. Just wandering around, having to work really hard to get anything, any kind of satisfaction. Things are tough. In our lives, the lives of perhaps the modern world, perhaps what we most experience when shraddha is absent is an absence of meaning. A kind of sort of sense of, well, meaninglessness is the right word, really. What's this about? And we can lose touch with the meaning that calls us, and that does actually hurt. Though if we notice that it hurts, actually we're on the right track. So, we can be, as it were, without shraddha, but as a capacity, it's innate. The jewel is with us. Our ability, in principle, to see the jewel is always there, and that's true for every human being. That possibility of responding and recognizing our nature, our potential, is there. We can't lose that as a capacity. We can lose touch with it. But we can forget. And it occurred to me that in a way, another version of the story, the friend might be a guardian angel who's kind of sitting there on the shoulder saying, hey, look in your garment. You caught that glimpse earlier. Look again. Really try and look at it. Try and get it out. Try and get it out of the garment. And that will be the voice of shraddha, and we're pointing us to act, to not forget the jewel. So what I want to do now is talk a bit about how we actually cultivate this faculty, how we actually cultivate shraddha. And I've got 3 headings, so I might drop one of them, we'll see. But in a way, the whole of the spiritual life could be put under this heading. And Samudraghosha, indeed, last week talked about how to practice the spiritual life. So this is just another angle on that in terms of cultivation of shraddha. So firstly, I want to talk about acting on it, acting on our shraddha, our glimpses of our potential, of truth, of beauty in the higher sense, goodness. So we know, the Buddha tells us, what we attend to grows, and especially when we act upon it. So it's good to actually notice those little glimmerings of shraddha, like my one this morning that said, oh, actually maybe I don't really need to go thinking of going back to bed. Maybe I should just really try and meditate. I attended to that. And this, of course, brings in, again, the whole area of ethics. And that was an example, again, of noticing, oh, there's non-skillful pull towards being a bit lazy this morning. And noticing that and saying, well, actually, no, that's not the thing to do here. That's not what I'm capable of more than that, actually. Maybe that might be a noticing of, oh, I've let myself down, I've been a bit dishonest actually, or I've caused hurt to somebody else. So we can notice that, and there's shraddha within that, because we're noticing, I could have done that differently. I could have done that in a way that would have been more satisfying, more meaningful, more true to myself. So shraddha includes a kind of a sensitivity to the effects of our actions. Big topic. I've spent a lot of time just on that. So sometimes it's just there in the moment, if we can notice it. There's that taste of freedom. It might be odd to talk about those ethical examples as tastes of freedom, but they are. Actually, if I meditate, that will be more liberative than going back to bed when I don't really need to. There can be a taste of freedom in that. But sometimes we can't rely purely on noticing shraddha, sort of as it were, in the moment, and going with it in the moment. So maybe some mornings we don't feel like meditation, and there isn't, or there doesn't seem to be, a little voice, a guardian angel or whatever, saying, well, actually, pointing us back to the jewel, as it were. And this is where discipline comes in. So when we are in touch with it, with the significance, say, of a regular meditation practice, or we can commit ourselves to, okay, I am going to meditate every day, or 5 days, at least 5 days a week, or whatever is appropriate for us. We can make a commitment, and then that will help us have the impetus to follow through, even when we're not fully in touch with the original inspiration. So commitment is important too. We're not always going to be inspired to do what's most valuable, most positive. And of course, there's also ritual commitment. So many people here have taken the step of becoming a mitra. Well, many have joined our order. And there's a ritual to becoming a mitra. And actually acting out that ritual, reinforces, builds upon the shraddha, and there's then more of a thread, as it were, carrying forward. A ritual can be a powerful thing. So there's commitment at that sort of level too. And then I'm still talking about acting on the shraddha. There's actually making changes to our lives. There's actually making adjustments to the way we're living our lives over the course of time, so that more and more of how we're living is centered upon our shraddha, our meaning, what's truly meaningful. Excuse me, what's truly meaningful for us. For myself, one example of that would be living in a community. I used to live on my own. That was fine. I was quite happy, actually, in a way, up to a point, living on my own. But I had a sense that it would be more meaningful to live with others, and it's proved much more so than I would have anticipated. Okay, I'd better move on because I'm getting a little bit behind. But no, hang on. There's something here about coming back to the title, becoming more who we truly are, discovering more who we truly are, by orienting our lives more and more around this central vision, call, if you like, by orienting ourselves more towards the jewel, we kind of become more whole. We become more of an individual, is the word that our teacher Sangha uses. Yeah. All of our life sort of comes gradually more and more together, so that more of it is in pursuit of what's of most central importance to us. And that's a much more satisfying way to live. I certainly find that. I'm not claiming I'm 100% doing that. I've still got some work to do, but much more of me is doing it than used to be the case. And that's a much more satisfying way to live, and more together, as it were. Okay. So let me talk about a different way of cultivating shraddha. I'm going to mention one which I haven't got time to go into, which is letting go of views that are in our way. So we've got all sorts of ideas about things, about the way things are, about who we are, that are not actually true, or at least are limited. And actually, one thing we have to do is to try and bring awareness to those, see through them, let them go. That's a whole other subject which I found I don't actually have time to go into. So let me focus now on conditions, supporting conditions. So again, our shraddha is not always going to be alive to us. Sometimes it's there, but it's kind of a bit less obvious. But sometimes, yeah, it's not alive to us, and we can't therefore just rely on acting on it in the moment, as I was saying. So what we need to be doing is placing ourselves in conditions that will spark off our shraddha. Doing certain activities that may spark it off. Reading the Dharma, of course. Puja, doing Buddhist ritual, can feed our shraddha. There's the whole area of the arts. I mentioned the Annunciation image on the wall of my room. It doesn't have to be Buddhist art even, if we choose reasonably wisely. I shouldn't put it that way. It can be a call rather than a conscious choice. But of course, in terms of conditions, what's most important, I'd say, is Sangha. And that's, of course, why we're all here tonight, is Sangha. And being with other people that can practice can have a particularly helpful effect in terms of drawing out or sparking off our shraddha, our sense of what's possible. It's not necessarily in the way of just sort of strong, conscious inspiration being communicated. So I got the fortune to live with two very experienced order members, Priya and Ratnaghosha. And I've been living with them for 10 years now. And sure, sometimes they speak out of inspiration, but it's more that through spending so much time around them, and yeah, communicating often in a very ordinary, in a sense, kind of way, something of who they are, as people more deeply committed to the spiritual life than I am, sort of rubs off on me, sort of like as a sort of a spiritual perfume, as it were, in the air, which I sort of take in, even without noticing I'm doing it. So there's that. Okay, I'm transitioning now into the last part of my talk. Still got a little way to go. So, but still staying on this theme of Sangha. So I told you that Bhante Sangharakshita, one of the ways he describes shraddha is the response of what's ultimate in us to what's ultimate in the universe. So this interaction of Sangha, you could say, is the response of what's ultimate in us to what's ultimate in somebody else. That'd be one way of putting that. There's a resonance between those responses. That can be really fantastic when it happens. You know, we can just be a bunch of nice people acting reasonably decently towards one another and with some sort of common interest. But if that's all it is, that isn't really Sangha, actually. To really be Sangha, there's something beyond, there's something that's communicated, which we might not even notice, but nevertheless it affects us. Something that's of the nature of our potential as human beings. Giving an example from my community, a week ago we met as a community and we were talking on quite a personal level, and I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, but Artisiddhi was sharing something of his inspiration. He wasn't giving a Dharma talk, he was just talking on a very personal level. But I was really inspired and moved by what he said. And I was speaking to someone else in the community and they had the same experience. So something about just really communicating from what's deep, most deep within us, especially when we're committed to the Dharma, that meets other people. There's a resonance. So we come here to sort of, in a way, a bit of a paradox, that to become more truly who we are, to become more fully ourselves, we have to sort of let go of ourselves as the idea of being separate at all. So coming back to the jewel can only be really truly ours when we no longer want it just for ourselves. It's a delightful paradox. It's only when we actually want to just give it away, share those riches with everybody without any reservation, then the jewel is fully ours. So, I'm coming to the end here. Let me just do a little recap and I've got something else. So I've been talking about shraddha, this sense of the fact that we are carrying a jewel, glimpses of it, movements to start to remove it, take it out. And I've been talking about how we cultivate that through acting upon it and through supporting conditions that feed it, that sort of stimulate it. I've also mentioned, trying to see and get rid of the views, let go of the views kind of in the way. So what I want to do before we go into groups, what I want to do to, as it were, finish, is read an extract from a poem. It's too long a poem to read the whole thing. In fact, I need to give it a tiny bit of context. And I want to read you an excerpt from Maitreya Bandhu's The Travellers from Orissa. very long poem that some of you may have heard. And this is a poem, it's a story not from the tradition, something Maitreya Bhante has written, but it tells of somebody who has already met the Buddha once and wants, at this point in the poem, wants to go back and see him again. And this man's name is Balika, and the name of his son is Meghiya. Maitreya Bhante has introduced Meghiya, who was the recipient of the teaching last week, but that's just to mention that. So at this point in the poem, in the story, if you like, they're on their way back together to try to meet the Buddha again. So I'm going to read this, and I'll just probably pause for a moment's silence, and then I'll set up the groups. When we got to the Ambavana, among the banyan trees, we couldn't hear the things the master said for all the buzz of talk. Meghiya kept on telling them to shush, turning sharply round, pressing his finger to his lips, while young men blocked my view. Eventually we turned our steps back home, Meghiya, dejected, struggling behind. We'd not got far beyond the hawker's cry, the smoke and cooking smells, when there he was, the master, walking a little way ahead with a motley crew of sadhus and disciples. I knew him by the way he moved, slow and even, like an elephant or tiger. Meghiya didn't notice him at first, but I said, "Master," before I knew I spoke. I'd never used the word before. He turned and said my name, Balika, he said, so soft I felt ashamed. I wept so hard I thought my ribs would break. He said, "Good," then carried on his way. So, going into groups, and there's a question for you. Do you recognize shraddha, the element of shraddha, in your lives? Do you sometimes have a sense of your own potential? When might that arise for you? What might trigger that off for you? And what does it call you to do? So there are some questions you can use. The team should already have those. You haven't got time to get that down. So if Adele presses the button, it can be whisked off until 10 past.